Poor old Louis XII had lasted only 3 months after his lively young English bride, Mary Tudor, had come waltzing into his quiet life. Mary was the age of Louis's own daughter, Claude, who had been married 5 months before to Francis I. Much to Louis's regret, that spoiled, extravagant, frivolous youngster was still heir to the French throne. The king, too old and weary for his years, had done his level best to keep up with his young bride, entering bravely into all the festivities celebrating her arrival. He had tried to dance again, gone hunting in the rain, forced himself to keep awake through long dramatic readings, and dined at the ungodly hour of 6, his former bedtime. It was too much for him. He simply collapsed and passed on with the old year. Mary then married, as it pleased her to do, a dashing young English soldier, Charles Brandon, and returned to England. And on the first day of the new year, 1515, Francis, Count of Angoulême, Duke of Valois, became the new King of France. On January 25th, 1515, Francis I, young and glamorous, rode to his coronation in the great cathedral at Reims. Clad in white silk, his horse caparisoned with silver and covered with precious stones. Oriflammes, waving before him, bore his new emblem, the salamander, a symbol of fiery endurance, chosen by his mother. Louise of Savoy, now the triumphant Queen Mother, had waited many long uncertain years for this glorious day. At last, fairly trembling with joy, she swept into the long-coveted place of highest honor, followed by her aunt, Madame Anne, her daughter-in-law, Queen Claude, and the ladies-in-waiting. That night she wrote in her diary, "On the day of St. Paul converted, 1515, my son was anointed and consecrated in the church at Reims. I have been amply rewarded for all the adversities and annoyances that came to me during my girlhood. Humility hath kept me company, and patience hath never abandoned me." Young Francis now began a reign of youth and gaiety. First, he called together all his congenial young companions and formed a permanent royal court. This was a novel idea. Hitherto the French barons had continued to live as they had during the Middle Ages, each in his own fortified castle somewhere in the country. That was now passé. Now the nobles must reside near the king, at Amboise, Fontainebleau, Paris, wherever he might fancy to be. And with their ladies, most certainly, for according to Francis, a court without ladies was like a spring without flowers. The ladies, needless to say, blossomed under his charm. Marguerite, his sister, who had always adored her brother, spoke of his unparalleled beauty, never seeming to see that his nose was far too long. She also vowed that God had endowed him with perfect knowledge. As to his knowledge, the Venetian ambassador remarked, "One is tempted to say that his wisdom is more on his lips than in his mind, yet his bearing is altogether that of a king. Merely to look at him, a stranger would say, 'That is the king.'" Hunting and making love were the king's favorite pastimes, but whatever caught his fancy was done with style and finesse. The idea of regaining Milan, which had been lost by Louis XII and given back to Maximilian Sforza, presented an exhilarating challenge, and he soon announced his intention to try it, after making an alliance with Venice. During his absence, his mother Louise was to act as regent of France, while his wife Claude, who was quiet and meek, would keep herself busy as usual, saying her prayers and doing needlework. Before the year was half over, Francis was off toward the Alps on his way to Italy, plumes and banners waving, and an army of 40,000 Frenchmen singing, the king goes over the mountains. Over the mountains he went, and by a new way, though not from choice. The Swiss soldiers had blocked the only mountain pass it was thought an army could possibly use. Too inexperienced to know what was involved, Francis took the new way. 72 cannon and 300 pieces of artillery had to be dragged up and down the frozen mountain slopes by hand. It took the army 5 days, but they did it. Then down out of the mountains like an avalanche of men, the French army descended upon Italy. Swiss soldiers hired by Maximilian Sforza, the papal forces, and Spanish troops from Naples were gathered to stem the invasion. The one great deciding battle took place at Marignano, about 10 miles from Milan, a battle which lasted 2 days and left 15,000 dead on the battlefield. Venetian soldiers fighting on the side of the French helped to win the victory. Then, instead of knighting soldiers on the battlefield, Francis, who had tested his sword in his first battle, let an experienced officer knight him. Calling for Bayard, his most valiant and fearless warrior, Francis knelt before him. Bayard drew his sword, and touching both of the royal shoulders, dubbed his lord and master Sir Knight. Milan fell after a short siege of only 3 weeks. The Duke Maximilian Sforza met Francis I at Pavia and very willingly resigned the dukedom of Milan. He declared himself sick and tired of trying to hang on to something that cost him so much trouble and money. He was glad to accept a settlement of 36,000 livres and retire to live comfortably in France the rest of his life. Pope Leo X turned pale with alarm when the victory was reported to him. "What will become of us?" he moaned. The only thing he could do was meet Francis and make the best deal possible. To his chagrin, he was obliged to return parts of the Duchy of Milan seized by Julius II and added to the papal state. Francis also demanded that the Pope, as supreme authority, give him the kingdom of Naples. Leo X hedged by more or less promising to do so after the death of Ferdinand of Aragon, to whom it now belonged. So the latest war was settled in a way that would only lead to more wars on the battleground of Italy.